Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely monumental piece of work, Thomas C. Schelling's Nobel Prize-winning masterpiece, The Strategy of Conflict. Published back in 1960, this single book completely revolutionized game theory. It literally changed the game on how we understand bargaining, power, and, well, survival itself. Now, to really grasp why this was such a game changer, you've kind of got to put yourself in the mindset of the late 1950s. The world was utterly trapped in the terrifying nuclear standoff of the Cold War. We're talking about the US and the Soviet Union having enough atomic weapons to destroy each other many times over. So the dilemma was this ultimate, literal, life-or-death question. How do you win a war that would end civilization? Traditional military strategy was totally focused on winning through superior brute force. But Schelling, he realized that brute force was dangerously obsolete. I mean, when both sides have nuclear weapons, traditional warfare simply doesn't work anymore. Okay, let's dive into this and map out exactly how we're going to unravel Schelling's counterintuitive mind-benders. We'll start with the Cold War dilemma, then move into the paradox of commitment. After that, we'll look at making threats credible, leaving something to chance, coordinating without words, and finally strategy in everyday life.
Right, let's kick things off with part one, the Cold War dilemma.
So Schelling essentially shifted the entire paradigm of how we view conflict. Most strategic thinking at the time assumed adversaries' interests were completely opposed. A zero-sum game, pure conflict, where my gain is exactly your loss. But Schelling argued the Cold War wasn't zero-sum at all. It was actually a mixed-motive game. Yes, the US and the Soviets were competing fiercely for advantage, but they actually shared a massive, overriding common interest, which was avoiding mutual destruction. They both wanted to survive. And Schelling pointed out that most conflicts, from tense international relations to standard labor negotiations, actually fall right into this mixed motive category.
Moving on to part two, the paradox of commitment.
Now, what's really interesting here is how counterintuitive this gets. Just look at Schelling's core argument. A party can strengthen its position by overtly worsening its own options. This is his famous paradox of commitment. We usually think that having freedom, flexibility, and lots of options are, inherently good things. But Schelling shows us that sometimes having less freedom is actually a massive strategic advantage. By voluntarily tying your own hands, you force the other side to accommodate you. So weakness, or at least the appearance of having literally no other choice, actually equals strength.
To really make sense of this, just think about the ancient concept of burning bridges. Picture a general who marches his army across a bridge into enemy territory, and then immediately orders his own men to burn that bridge behind them. By making retreat completely impossible, his threat to fight to the death becomes fully credible to the enemy. He has overtly worsened his own options. He literally cannot retreat. But his bargaining position, it's infinitely stronger. Because if you can convince the other side that you absolutely cannot back down, well, they are the ones who have to yield.
Which brings us to part three, making threats credible. Here we run into what Schelling calls the credibility problem. Think about it. A threat is completely useless if the other side doesn't believe you'll actually carry it out. And if carrying out that threat would be incredibly costly to you, why on earth should they believe you? An empty bluff doesn't show strength, it actually just reveals weakness. So you need a way to prove that you aren't just talking a big game.
So how do we actually solve this? Schelling provides several brilliant, actionable steps. First, make it irreversible, exactly like burning that bridge. Second, create a solid reputation. Build a track record of always following through so people just know not to test you. Third, and I find this one fascinating, delegate authority. Put the decision to retaliate into the hands of someone else who can't be easily controlled. And fourth, use a tripwire. Set up a physical or systemic boundary where, if the enemy crosses it, your retaliation happens automatically, taking the decision completely out of your hands.
Let's turn to part four, leaving something to chance. And this brilliantly illustrates why unpredictability is actually a superpower. You'd probably think that threatening a guaranteed, certain retaliation would be the strongest possible move, right? But Schelling argued the exact opposite. If your behavior is totally predictable, your adversary can easily discount it and just plan around it. But if your retaliation is uncertain or randomized, they can't plan for it. A threat that just might be carried out introduces genuine uncertainty and fear. It turns out to be a much more efficient deterrent.
The ultimate extreme of this logic is the concept of a doomsday machine. Imagine a machine that will automatically destroy the world if your country is attacked, and once it's turned on, it absolutely cannot be turned off. It's the ultimate tripwire. Because the response is entirely automatic and out of your control, the threat is incredibly credible. The paradox here is terrifying, sure, but it's logically flawless. The less control you have over your response, the more credible your threat becomes. You're effectively making a threat that leaves the ultimate outcome slightly to chance, which makes it deeply believable.
But of course, these nuclear standoffs carry a fatal risk. Let's walk through the steps of what Schelling called the reciprocal fear of surprise attack. Step 1. You fear a surprise attack. Step 2. Because of that fear, you have a massive incentive to strike first, a total use-it-or-lose-it dilemma. Step 3. Your enemy feels the exact same way, and your mutual fear just reinforces each other's aggression. And finally, step 4, an attack actually happens. Not because either side really wanted to conquer the other, but purely out of a mutual, spiraling panic. It's a tragic cycle where fear, rather than actual malice, is what drives the destruction.
All right, let's explore Part 5, coordinating without words.
I want you to genuinely think about this scenario for a second. You and a friend are separated in a massive city. You don't have your phones, you haven't made a backup plan, but you absolutely must find each other today. Where do you go to look for them? I'll give you a second to think. Did you think of the main train station? Maybe the biggest town square, or the city's most famous monument?
The place you just thought of is exactly what game theorists now call a focal point, or a Schelling point. It's a natural solution that people intuitively coordinate on without any explicit communication, simply because it stands out as the most obvious answer. Schelling identified an archetype he called the coordinator, someone who's highly perceptive at finding these mutually acceptable focal points in conflicts. They help adversaries naturally find a way out of a standoff without ever having to explicitly negotiate a deal.
Schelling really loved using everyday metaphors to explain this kind of tacit bargaining. He famously pointed out the enlightening similarities between a limited war and a traffic jam. Think about a traffic jam. It's a mixture of conflict, since everyone selfishly wants to get to their destination first, but also cooperation, because nobody actually wants to crash their car. Limited war is exactly the same. It's not just a scaled-down total war. It's like a giant, dangerous traffic jam where nations are maneuvering, signaling their resolve, and testing limits, all while trying desperately to coordinate around the focal point of not triggering a nuclear apocalypse.
Let's move to Part 6 and see how this builds into strategy in everyday life.
This book changed game theory, specifically because Schelling focused heavily on real-life examples. Whether you're dealing with international relations and arms control, navigating high-stakes business mergers, forming political coalitions, or, quite frankly, just trying to negotiate bedtime with your kids, the exact same mechanics apply. The bluffer who makes empty threats is always going to be ignored, while the strategist who understands credible commitments will always hold the power.
So the crucial takeaway from all of this is that strategy is not just about having more power. It is entirely about managing interdependence. In a connected world, whether you're at the UN or sitting in your living room, your choices affect others, and their choices affect you. Real strategic success relies on understanding this mutual fate, making those credible commitments, and finding those focal points for coordination. It's all about brains, restraint, and managing expectations, not just brute force.
And that leaves us with one final provocative question for you. In your next high-stakes negotiation, whether that's for a salary raise, a big business deal, or a major life decision, will your first instinct be to aggressively try to maximize your power? Or will you be brave enough to try Schelling's paradox, burn a bridge, and overtly worsen your own options to lock in your success? It's an entirely new way to look at the world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, good luck navigating your own mixed motive games out there.